All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're really going to try and unpack this sudden, frankly, whiplash-inducing ceasefire in the U.S.-Iran war of 2026. I mean, after 6 weeks of just brutal, intense conflict, it feels like the whole world is holding its breath. And get this, just days before this truce was announced, this is the kind of apocalyptic threat we were hearing from the White House. A statement like that, I mean, it pushed an already unbelievably tense situation right to the absolute brink. A lot of people really thought a nuclear exchange was on the table.
Okay, so let's really dive into this. The fighting has stopped, for now. But you gotta ask, what does this fragile agreement actually mean? Is this a real off-ramp from a totally catastrophic war? Or is it just a tactical timeout before we get the next, maybe even more dangerous round?
So, first things first, let's try to get a handle on the ceasefire itself. This thing didn't come out of some long, drawn-out diplomatic process. No, it basically materialized overnight. And this was right after weeks of escalating conflict that had, the entire globe on edge. And this timeline, wow, it really highlights just the sheer speed of this crisis. Think about it. We went from the start of a major regional war at the end of February to a threat of literally total annihilation in early April, and then boom, suddenly a pivot to a ceasefire and talks. All of that inside of about 6 weeks. It's just wild.
Now, what's really interesting here, and kind of scary, is just how precarious this whole thing is. We're not talking about a formal treaty. In fact, some sources are comparing it to like a series of coordinated social media posts. It's a temporary pause. And this is crucial. Israel has already come out and said, hey, this doesn't apply to our operations in Lebanon. And that's a major flashpoint that could easily reignite the whole thing.
Okay, so a ceasefire is one thing, but a lasting peace? That is a whole other beast. To even get close to that, the negotiators have to somehow bridge this massive chasm between two sets of demands that are almost completely opposed to each other.
And this right here, this really lays out the fundamental problem. You've got the US and Israel demanding that Iran basically dismantle its entire strategic defense. And on the other side, Iran wants security guarantees and a total relief from sanctions. Look, these aren't just starting points for a negotiation. They are fundamentally, mutually exclusive visions for what the region should look like.
So, let's be clear about the crucial point here. For the US and Israel, the absolute, non-negotiable red line is Iran's nuclear potential. And it really boils down to this number, 970 pounds of highly enriched uranium that's stored deep in underground facilities. The Pentagon has been crystal clear on this. It must be surrendered, one way or another, by persuasion or by force.
Which, of course, brings us to the central strategic debate that is absolutely lighting up foreign policy circles right now. Was President Trump's extreme, frankly apocalyptic rhetoric, was it a stroke of genius? A brilliant gambit that pulled everyone back from the brink? Or was it something else entirely?
Yeah, we're talking about the madman theory. It's a strategy that's famously associated with Richard Nixon. And the idea is pretty simple, really. If you can make your opponent think you're dangerously unpredictable, that you're capable of doing the most extreme things, well then, they'll probably be more likely to make concessions just to avoid a total catastrophe.
So the big question is, did it work? Yeah, a ceasefire was achieved, but analysts are completely, fiercely divided on this. Was this a tactical victory that came from a super high-stakes bluff, or was it actually a massive strategic failure that's left the United States in a worse position than before the war even started?
Well, the initial take from some corners, people like David Sanger at the New York Times, was basically, yes, Trump's tactic, as risky as it was, it worked. It created the off-ramp. It achieved the most immediate goal, which was stopping the fighting and calming down global markets that were just spiraling into a total panic.
But that view was challenged almost immediately. You had critics like Daniel Drezner basically firing back, saying, hold on, what victory? Beyond the ceasefire itself, what did the US actually gain here? Iran hasn't conceded a thing on its nuclear program, its missiles, or its influence in the region. Nothing.
And he's not alone in thinking that. In fact, an analysis from the Center for American Progress went even further. They concluded that by just surviving the onslaught and, at the same time, inflicting significant economic and strategic pain, Iran actually came out of this whole conflict in a stronger position.
So, if it wasn't a clear strategic win, well, that begs an even deeper question, doesn't it? Why did this war even happen in the first place? Because the official justifications, they've been kind of a moving target from the very beginning. So the administration's line was there's an imminent nuclear threat.
But, a lot of analysts immediately pointed out that it was the U.S. withdrawal from the 2018 Iran nuclear deal that dismantled the very structure that was designed to prevent that exact threat. So you have that contradiction, combined with the timing of it all, and it led a lot of people to really question what the real motives were here.
And, well, this number is pretty hard to ignore. Critics are suggesting this is no coincidence. They are pointing to Trump's own past accusations that his predecessors would start a war with Iran just to boost their poll numbers. The war literally began as his disapproval rating hit rock bottom, which just fueled all the speculation that this was a classic wag the dog scenario.
But look, whatever the motivation was, the cost of just 6 weeks of war has been absolutely staggering. And I mean across the board. For the United States, for Iran, and for the entire global economy.
Let's start with the money, the direct financial cost. We're talking an estimated $33 billion spent by the Department of Defense in just under 40 days. Let that sink in. That is nearly $1 billion a day for a war with no clear victory.
And then, of course, there's the devastating human cost. The numbers are just awful. U.S. and Israeli strikes have reportedly killed over 1,700 Iranian civilians, and more than 250 of them were children. That's a moral stain that, really damages America's reputation on the world stage.
And the economic pain, that was felt by pretty much everyone, everywhere. With Iran disrupting the Strait of Hormuz, 10% of the world's entire oil supply was just choked off. The result? Gas prices back in the U.S. surged by nearly 40% at their peak. People definitely felt that at the pump.
In this table, it really just powerfully lays out the final strategic balance sheet. You look at the U.S. gains. Okay, some Iranian military assets were damaged, but that stuff is largely reversible. Iran can and will rebuild. But then you look at the U.S. losses, and they're far more severe. We're talking 13 American service members killed, alliances with key partners in Europe and Asia are frayed, U.S. military credibility has taken a hit, and on top of it all, critical munitions, the expensive stuff, are now depleted.
So where does all this leave us? Where does it leave the world? The bombing has stopped, yes. But the path forward is, well, it's anything but clear.
The negotiators heading to Islamabad are basically walking into a minefield. Think about the hurdles. Can the U.S. even be trusted not to just attack again? On the flip side, is Iran really willing to compromise on the one thing it sees as its ultimate insurance policy, its nuclear program? And is Washington politically willing to offer the kind of sanctions relief that would actually make a deal stick? A no to any one of those questions could cause the whole thing to collapse.
So, in the end, this ceasefire, and believe me, it is welcome, it hasn't actually resolved any of the fundamental issues that started this war in the first place. What we're left with is a conflict with no clear winner and a peace with no